on edge. The city's mayor will keep a nightly curfew in place after daily riots over alleged police brutality as solidarity protests pop up from New York to D.C. to Seattle. The disaster in Nepal, the death toll now stands at 5,844 people with over 11,000 injured. Fears build on an impending public health crisis as rescuers attempt to reach remote villages hit by the quake. And in Israel, with the number of reported cases of sexual harassment in the military on the rise, inside the experience of one teen who took her story to Facebook, where it went viral.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the news today. Baltimore is still protesting, and so are cities elsewhere in the United States. Demonstrations sparked by the death in custody of African-American Freddie Gray have spread to New York, Seattle, Boston, Washington, D.C., and Minneapolis. The U.S. Justice Department has opened an investigation into the death of Gray, who suffered fatal spinal injuries when arrested. The Washington Post has reported that, according to a police document, Gray was, quote, banging against walls inside the police vehicle after he was arrested. Before we will start discussing the bigger picture in the United States, let's take a look back.
We have to come to terms with some hard truths about race and justice in America.
We can't just leave this to the police. I think there are police departments that have to do some soul searching. I think there's some communities that have to do some soul searching. But I think we as a country have to do some soul searching.
And with me to understand a little bit more about what is happening in the United States is Mitchell Barak, pollster, commentator, and political analyst. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also Dr. Udi Zomer, Associate Professor of Political Science at the Tel Aviv University. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. So let's start to understand, because this is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that we can say that it specifically happened. It's something, occasional. It's something that happened in a certain point and explode. This is something that's been happening under the surface, or maybe above the surface, and now it's getting bigger and bigger. And we're talking about 2015. We're not talking about 60, 50, 70 years ago.
Yeah, well, I think especially given the fact that you have an African-American man in the White House, the frustration or maybe even the disillusionment with the notion that, once Barack Obama, the first African-American man to be elected president, assumed office in 2008, there was a sense that maybe America is in a post-racial era, or arrived at a post-racial era, but the facts on the ground are different. The facts on the ground, the roots of the discrimination, the roots of the disparities go back, decades and even centuries ago, and therefore. In hindsight, maybe it's not surprising that America is not in a post-racial era, but in the hearts and minds of people on the street, it's very frustrating for sure. Sorry.
So, it's in the hearts of minds, and sometimes I'm looking about what is happening here in Israel, and sometimes we're trying to explain to people outside. We just spoke about it, about the differences between the Mizrahi Jews and the Sephardi Jews, and who they are, and that the Israeli society is also divided, especially after the Israeli elections. demonstrations, and it seems that the same cases in the United States, when you see the demonstrations, you see white people and black people going out and demonstrating. And what I'm trying to understand is what is causing these officers to have such an easy finger on the trigger?
Well, this is a historical divide. This is not just a difference of Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews. I mean, first of all, look back historically, meaning a lot of the descendants, the people that are demonstrating, were brought to America forcibly, many of them for slavery. When they were released as slaves, they were still discriminated against, and it took a very, very long time until they even got the right to vote, meaning this recent movie about Selma, Alabama, this is in the 1960s. So it's taken a very long time to do that. And I think part of it is there are black people serving in the military, black people in the White House, African Americans that are in the police force, but a lot of the crimes, there was just an article in the New York Times, which is very important to bring up, about for how every 100 black women that are living in a city, there's only 80 males. 20% or 30%, depending on the city, are missing because they're in jail or they've died young. So the whole structure of the family is different. The whole structure of what it looks like is different. And it's a very, very difficult cycle to break. And many of these demonstrations we're seeing are happening in inner cities. And it's like a powder keg because they're living in inner cities and not the best conditions. And these kinds of things with the police can just, put it the other way.
Yes, before we're continuing this, let's take a look at how the anger and protest in Baltimore has spread across the United States in a report from ABC News.
No racist police!
Still taking to the streets their demands for justice.
We stand as a nation. We fight for our rights.
Protests against the alleged police assault on Freddie Gray, who died of a fractured spine after his arrest, spreading from Baltimore City Hall to the steps of the White House.
This is what democracy looks like.
To New York City, where police arrested protesters blocking traffic. But back in Baltimore, peace prevailed on a second night of curfew enforced by 2,000 National Guard troops and 1,000 police officers after the city erupted Monday into rioting, looting, and arson.
People are picking up bags and brooms and cleaning up. Parents are keeping kids at home and off the streets.
The Baltimore Symphony playing an outdoor concert as calm returns to the city, but precautions still in place. The stands empty Wednesday at Camden Yards. A Major League Baseball game closed to the public for the first time ever. And that mother seen in this viral video angrily going after her son after seeing him in the crowd with a rock says her teen has learned a humbling lesson.
I trust that he'll understand at the end what I did was not for the cameras, but was for the love that I have for him.
Yes, and ABC's Marcy Gonzalez is in Baltimore. Marcy, good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, Marcy, let's try to understand. Does it look like violence is calming down in Baltimore for the long run?
They're dealing with it quite well. There's been a curfew in place over the past 2 nights going into effect at 10 p.m. Police and the National Guard have been out enforcing it. And last night, when it hit 10 p.m., the crowds who had been out protesting really seemed to clear very quickly. Meanwhile, police have handed over their preliminary findings into the cause of Freddie Gray's death over to the state's attorney's office, and they will continue the investigation. There is still some frustration, though, that the details of that report for now are not being made public. Lucy?
Yes, Marcy, thank you very much for this report from you.
Thank you.
So, like we're hearing, this is, I'm trying to go back, and we're always trying to go back to the basis, and the basis is education, is where it went wrong in the American education. How come, after all this time, the education system, the culture, wasn't able to bring these two sides together and make people understand that there is no difference between black and white?
So I think if you look at the statistics, you realize that there are certain aspects. If you look at the education system, for instance, federal records show that the likelihood that a young boy or who has all sorts of behavioral problems in school will be expelled from school is significantly larger than the likelihood of a white boy with the exact same characteristics, other than the fact that he is white. So there are problems within the educational system. There are problems in the justice system. Okay, the likelihood of a black man being shot by the police is 21 times larger than the likelihood of a white man being shot by the police force. And those problems are structural in the sense, I mean, we have to remember that America is a federal system. As Israelis, we think, what's the big deal? You ask the police commissioner to change the recruiting strategies, right? You change the makeup of the police force, and that's great, right? It might happen take 2 or 3 years, but it's something that could happen in the foreseeable future. In the United States, things are way more complicated in that sense. We have, so Barack Obama is an African American president who had an attorney general who is African American, the first African American man, Eric Holder, now an African American woman. Loretta Lynch took his position, and still the justice system is not reformed. How come? Well, the reason is that law enforcement in the United States is very, very complicated. You can't. So in many cases, what we see on the streets, the police forces that we see on the streets, are not federal troops, right? They are state troops or local troops, and therefore, and you can't really federalize all of those troops. So the way to reform is very, very long, and in that sense, if you think about the responsibility of the central government of President Obama, of course they bear some of the responsibility, but those, as we said earlier, those roots go decades and centuries back.
If I could just add that in a lot of counties in the United States, sheriff is an elected position. So they actually run for sheriff, and it's elected by the people. So the people have to decide who they want to be the county sheriff, if you will.
So the county sheriff can, the possibility that a county sheriff will be black is lower than he will be white?
Well, anyone can run. It depends on where he's running and so forth.
But that has to do with the research that you mentioned earlier. So the fact that African American families and African American men are in jail or not alive anymore mean that the structure of the family, as you mentioned, is gone, and therefore the entire community cannot really organize. So in many places, including, for instance, Ferguson, Missouri. In Ferguson, Missouri, you have a black majority since the beginning of the century. So how come this black majority is not translated into black government? We know that the government there is predominantly white. Is not translated into a black, or at least a relatively black police force,
or at least 50-50.
Yeah. So and the reason why is that if you don't have a stable family, if you don't have a stable relationship, you're not registered to vote. It's very hard to translate the numbers into actual political power.
A lot of them don't go out to vote, so that's also a problem, is that they don't go out and vote, and there's a large segment of the population, I don't know how large, that has a distrust for the law and a distrust for the system. And there are even people that say, do not talk to the police under any circumstances. Even if you see a crime, don't report it, don't tell. There's a whole big campaign in these inner cities because they don't trust the police. They think they're going to get railroaded if they get arrested.
I want to take you to the fact that the United States just elected 6 years ago a black president. And the fact that it elected a black president, it was why? It was just to do a check and say, okay, here we have a black president, and that's it. But maybe this president, when he came into office, maybe he forgot that the fact that he is black has a big significance, because it is a symbol, because the United States wanted to pick a black president, and because he cannot forget the color of his skin.
Well, I think that there are some people that voted for him, and that was an important point, and there's some people that voted for him, and the fact that he was black didn't have an important component to it. But what I think is also important is Barack Obama did not have the typical black experience growing up. His father was black, he was raised by his mother and his grandparents, and he really grew up a lot in Hawaii. So he didn't have an inner city kind of youth experience. So I think it's a little different. I do think that in America, that I think it's really a historic day when he was elected, and that it didn't stop because there is racism.
More than that, it's like giving these youngsters a big
For a lot of them, he also didn't have a father he was raised by his mother. So he also had an absentee father that he only met
It's a big example that where you can achieve and what you can reach, and that there is no limit.
It should be, but it's a very difficult for many of them to break out of the system. You have to graduate high school, and it's very difficult if you're in a high school program where not everyone is committed to study. facilities, and you don't get the extra help as in white neighborhoods. You asked about America and relations. I can tell you about my experience growing up. I grew up in the 70s in New York in a predominantly Jewish suburb, and at that point I went to public school, in elementary school, and they decided, the federal government decided to bus in. You could not have all white schools. You had to integrate. It was school integration. So we had black students coming from the other side of New Rochelle, New York, which is where I'm from. And there was not a lot of integration in the class, meaning they came from their reality, which was much different from the suburban reality that the Jewish and Italian kids, where most of the neighborhood was, who lived in houses, whose parents were married, who had 2 cars or 1 car, commuted to a job in the city, versus black kids from the projects that were being bused in.
Exactly from this point, because the fact that you integrate students together, the fact that you put them in the same class, it doesn't mean that this is where your work stops. It means that it's only where your work started. And it seems that in the American education system, they don't realize that you have to bring these 2 sides together and bridge between them,
well,
although they're living in the United States.
I'm not sure that I would like. I beg to differ. Okay, so I think, for instance, if you look at higher education in the United States, if you look at affirmative action policies, okay, affirmative action policies today, the only reason why affirmative action policies are constitutional in the United States today, based on decisions of the Supreme Court, is the notion of diversity in the classroom. The idea that when you have a diverse classroom, the entire educational process, the entire educational experience is different. It benefits everybody, included, the students, the professors, and the entire experience. And so, for instance, that I think is a very important example for the fact that diversity does matter in the United States. But I think that also beside, so you mentioned earlier, how he was elected, etc. But there was also the notion of what has he done, right? He's the African-American president. What has he done? And
how come all these problems are popping out, especially in his period?
So, okay, so I think this, why it's popping out, I think it has to do with the frustration and disillusionment. The expectations were sky high and the reality is different. But if we look at President Obama's record, I think that in many ways he was very focused on being president of all Americans, but many of the policies that he put in place benefited African Americans a lot. So, for instance, if you think about the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, the health care reform, the health care in America now allows for African Americans, who for the most part are not as well off as just like in the 1970s in New Rochelle, I guess, exactly the same, but the same, the statistics are not that different. And this kind of affordable care, this kind of act allows this kind of, public provision of health. It's a little more complicated than just public provision, but the fact of the matter is that this benefits blacks. The same thing with the justice system. I mean, the attorney generals that he appointed, they, of course, it's not something that you can change overnight, but they have made great effort, including in the specific cases, in Ferguson, Missouri, and Staten Island, etc., to make sure that these minorities are protected.
I want to join to this conversation from U.S., from Baltimore. Now is Karen Abdul Malik, also known as Queen Noor, president of the National Association of Black Storytellers. Good evening. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you, and good afternoon.
Yeah, for us it's evening, and I believe that for you it's good afternoon. So Queen Noor, really, we're trying to understand this from the Israeli perspective, and sometimes we're thinking about it because we are here experiencing a lot of, let's say, differences between Arabs and Jews, between Jews among themselves, between even Arabs among themselves. And we know about diversity. We know about living together but not living the same culture, but it seems that it's becoming a big subject in the United States, and maybe this is surfacing again in the United States, and it was hidden. And my question is why it was hidden in the United States. Why no one gave it the attention that it needed to be given in order not to get to this point where young people are being killed and murdered because of the color of their skin?
First, let me say that it's not hidden. It's just that racism has been the big elephant in the room for a very long time, since its inception. And so it's not hidden, it's always been here. And it's just that from Trayvon Martin to Eric Gardner to Freddie Gray, more attention is being brought to it. It is a systemic problem. And just as I was listening to the broadcast and also seeing that the Ethiopian Israelis also are having to protest, it's systemic beyond the United States. And in the United States, what we must do is tell our stories. We can't have other people telling our stories. And so we must first tell the stories that are concealed and those stories of resistance, because those stories are the stories of victory that we have come through as Barack said earlier, the whole enslavement period and time period coming through that to this point. It is still stories that are concealed, and we must tell those stories and tell those stories to our youth so that they understand that we have victory. We do have victory.
Queen Noor, you know, from my point of view, you know, from someone who's living in Israel and reading and seeing what is happening in the United States, you know, you're saying telling your story, spreading it out. I don't hear as Barack Obama, as the President of the United States, the first black President of the United States, actually telling his story, putting his story out there and saying this is one of the most important things that we need to discuss about, and not threats outside, and not maybe the economy, because if we will tell these stories like you're saying, even we can bring this change in economy, this change in education. And for me, it was a little bit disappointing seeing it from outside, because we are dealing here with the same issues.
Right, it is not disappointing for me. And I heard you earlier say that, did Barack Obama forget? No, he has not forgotten. But you can also cannot put every black person inside of the same story. And so we're not disappointed. And then what you said about the economy, it's all, the story of racism, economy is an affect of racism. And so when we tell our stories, we also must look to tell stories that are transformative. And we must come together in collective visions, not only with African Americans, but also with the other people in the United States, to tell stories that have collective visions of what do we want what do we want the United States to look like? How does equality look? And collectively, we can tell those stories and we can move there through story. And that's what we believe at the National Association of Black Storytellers.
Yeah, Queen Noor, it was a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for giving us your perspective and showing something else about what we don't know here in Israel. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you for having me.
Before we're continuing to speak and taking what she said further, I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira takes a look at the sequence of violence over the last few years in the United States and some of the reasons and consequences of this ongoing crisis in divided America.
The clashes in Baltimore, which spread to other cities in the U.S. following the death of Freddie Gray, are just the latest in a chain of clashes over the last few years between American authorities and civilians. All of them came after controversial incidents involving the death of African Americans. Though in many of the cases the riots tended to fade after a while, the tension still remains, at least under the surface. In July 2013, George Zimmerman, member of a Florida Neighborhood Watch, was acquitted in court after fatally shooting African-American teen Trayvon Martin, and reactions were not long in coming. Thousands of people from coast to coast took to the streets, protesting what they saw as a clear failure of the justice system. Just 1 year later, another incident sparking outrage, this time in the city of Ferguson, Missouri. Young African-American Michael Brown was shot dead by white police officer Darren Wilson, who claimed that Brown disobeyed his order to move to the sidewalk. It was later revealed that Brown was unarmed. In November 2014, a grand jury decided not to press charges against Wilson, and once again, America found itself in the midst of violent protests. The next round of violence came when New Yorker Eric Garner, also African-American, was choked to death by NYPD officers in July 2014. From the mid-1960s until today, the United States has known many rounds of racial violence, and critics say little has been learned. Many point to the light police trigger finger, especially when the gun is aimed at minorities. Others accuse a legal system that fails to adequately punish offending police officers. But perhaps these riots reflect a deeper crisis in contemporary America, a growing frustration at the economic gap between the different sectors, a frustration that is threatening to tear the country apart.
We need to
Yes, and we were talking about storytelling, and Queen Noor said and talked about the storytelling, and basically it's the narrative. It's the minority asking to get their rights, and they're not getting it. And you just mentioned, we were just talking, you just mentioned this is about getting equality, and the black people were the first one to get equality in the United States.
Exactly. So equality, that's the fundamental principle in the ethos of the United States, in the Constitution of the United States. The first ones to get equality, as you said, under the 14th Amendment, right after the Civil War, African Americans. Women got it, almost 50 years later in the 1919, sorry. Even gays are getting equality today. I mean, there's a case under review in the U.S. Supreme Court about gay marriage that is probably, we'll hear the decision later in late June. So African Americans are watching women getting equality, are watching sexual minorities getting equality, and still they are in many ways left behind. And I think this is a cause of the frustration that we mentioned earlier.
I'm hearing her, and I heard her, and I'm hearing myself when we are talking about equality and racial issues here in Israel between Jews and Arabs. Because again, if you will bring the job test, and you will bring two people, and one of them is Jewish and one of them is Arab, and they will have the same professional skills. At the end of the day, the Jewish person more likely to get the job than the Arab person, and than the Arab man, and it's a problem, and I can understand this, because if since the beginning you're being judged, how can you even progress and not give up and say, come on, I got no chance?
Well, it's also about social networking, meaning, if I was looking for a job or you were looking for a job, you would have a lot of people to speak to that are in the industry and so forth, whereas really Arabs are not necessarily socializing in the same way with those people that might be working in companies or places that are providing jobs. So I think some of that is the same in the United States, meaning, if I look at, again, how the Jewish community lives in the United States, if you need some legal advice for something, there's 15 people you could ask right on your phone easily. If you're black growing up in America or Puerto Rican growing up in America, you might not know a lot of lawyers or a lot of doctors. So it's a different kind of upbringing there, and it's kind of like a parallel society to a certain extent.
It's this issue of integrating, of being together, of actually living together. The fact that they're right now like big cities and big neighborhoods that only contain like black people, it's for me, it's something that I cannot understand and I cannot digest.
Well, it's black people living an hour away from the White House, okay? Living in a neighborhood, the specific neighborhood where Freddie Gray was arrested, has 97% of the people African Americans, and life expectancy there is more or less the life expectancy in Iraq and Kazakhstan. So definitely the segregation is there. Mitchell mentioned a few reasons for the structural segregation. We mentioned a few of them earlier, and those structural barriers are very, very hard to get over. So.
Yes, at least, you know what? We are facing the same problems that all the world is facing. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. We're not unique. It's good. We're going out for a small break. 2 minutes, and I'll be back. Baltimore on edge. The city's mayor will keep a nightly curfew in place after daily riots over alleged police brutality as solidarity protests pop up from New York to D.C. to Seattle. The disaster in Nepal, the death toll now stands at 5,844 people with over 11,000 injured. Fears build on an impending public health crisis as rescuers attempt to reach remote villages hit by the quake. And in Israel, with the number of reported cases of sexual harassment in the military on the rise, inside the experience of one teen who took her story to Facebook, where it went viral. Welcome back to the news today. With a death toll at over 5,800 people in Nepal, much of the stories are of devastation. Yet teams today pulled a 15-year-old boy out alive from under wreckage 5 days after the guest house collapsed, and later today rescued a second survivor from the rubble of a collapsed hotel. But teams there have many months of work ahead of them. I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben-Ari is in Kathmandu and spent some of the day inside an IDF field hospital there. Here's the report.
A military hospital on the outskirts of Kathmandu. This is now the destination of many of the injured still being evacuated from the areas affected by last Saturday's devastating earthquake in Nepal. But this hospital has existed for less than 48 hours. The Israeli army, as it has in many of the major disasters that have struck across the globe in recent years, managed to set up this facility within a day of its arrival in the country.
As has been the case with previous military operations undertaken by the IDF, all sorts of different people have been arriving at this military field hospital for treatment, including foreign nationals, as well as Nepalese citizens, and Israelis who have been brought in from remote areas.
On its first day of activity, many of the injured and sick Nepalese showed up at the hospital gates on their own for treatment.
We want really help for the people, of Nepali people, as we are the victim of earthquake right now. So we are really very thankful to Israel people that they came here and helped us so much and gave us the medical care.
This man, a Spanish traveler, was brought in with his fingers suffering from frostbite.
The situation with the patient is irreversible, unfortunately, because he waited a number of days and only came in now. This is a case of gangery, essentially. We will do our best to help him.
The hospital is divided into departments like any other, with a sanitized operation room, an intensive care unit, and everything else necessary to provide a high level of care to patients.
We have 120 medical professionals. The rest are search and rescue, support staff, communications, and other groups such as that.
The more severe cases have to be flown in. In the short time we were here, 3 separate helicopters landed on the base perimeters, carrying people injured in the remote rural areas surrounding Kathmandu. It is now clear that these mountainous communities were the most heavily affected by the deadly quake, with reports persisting of villages being nearly wiped out. Israel's image on the international stage is often a problematic one, and some see projects like this as having the potential to change the perception of the country in the eyes of some of its critics.
We're not doing it for that. If it's a side effect that happens after that, then we welcome it, but it's not our focus here.
While there may be diplomatic benefits to this endeavor, the extent of the Nepalese disaster is slowly becoming apparent. The soldiers and medical personnel here are focused for now on the difficult work which lies ahead and has only just begun.
Yes, and while covering the disaster in Nepal, Shai Ben-Ari also traveled today to Sakao, a rural village northeast of Kathmandu. Here's some of what the team witnessed there.
Yes, we are here in the town of Sakao this evening, a few miles to the northeast of the city of Kathmandu. And if the city of Kathmandu is gradually and slowly returning to normal, as you can see here behind me, here in Sakao, normalcy is still very far off. We're talking about a region where buildings are often built of clay bricks and wood, and you can see the result. Here, many of the houses have just been torn apart, although some parts are left standing. For example, this wall here, which you can see, still has pictures of family members still hung on the side of it here, as it is just surrounded by complete and utter destruction. We're talking about 72 people who were killed in this area alone, as well as some people still characterized as missing. Indeed, search operations, as you can see, are going on behind us with the Nepalese army present. We managed to speak with a local resident, a young man who told us of exactly what he expects from the international community in general with this crisis here in Nepal.
Our problem is not food. Our wishes are reconstruction. This whole Sakao is destroyed, so main problem will be the instruction problem. Yeah, and some problem we can manage like food, feed, but we cannot manage the reconstruction. This is the main problem.
Yes, well, as you heard, the expectation here is that the international community will begin to help primarily with the issue of construction, but they are running into certain problems. For example, we just ran into members of a French NGO who say that the Nepalese government and the Nepalese army are not really permitting them to join the rescue search efforts and rehabilitation efforts here for reasons that are really unclear. It may be a bureaucratic issue, but the Nepalese are keeping a very strict control of the operations here and are not allowing all of the players who have arrived in this country to help out. Just one of many problems that the people here in Nepal are facing.
Yes, definitely. We're going back to Iran. While top American and Iranian diplomats express confidence that a nuclear deal can be reached, new information from both Britain and an Iranian opposition leader raises doubts over Tehran's reliability. The News Today diplomatic correspondent Eli Ochenberg has the details.
Since the preliminary nuclear framework deal between the P5+1 powers and Iran was signed on April 2nd, many Western concerns have been raised whether Tehran can really be trusted. New information Britain supplied to a UN sanctions panel could further undermine belief in Tehran. According to the UK government, Iran is still actively purchasing nuclear materials through a network linked to 2 blacklisted firms. The UN panel said it has yet to conduct an independent investigation on the allegations. But Iranian reliability might be challenged on a different front as well.
The people of Iran indeed called the Mullah's regime as godfather of ISIS and other fundamentalist groups.
Maryam Rajavi, a top Iranian opposition leader, has testified to a U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee subcommittee, saying that Tehran wants nuclear weapons to foster Islamic extremism and that the provisions of the emerging nuclear deal are not tough enough. For his part, however, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif voiced confidence that a final agreement can be reached.
We want to finish this way before June 30th. We want to use every opportunity, including working around the clock.
Earlier this week, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also said that though more tough negotiations lie ahead, a nuclear deal is closer than ever before.
And with me right now from London is Dr. Ali Nourizadeh, Director Center of the Iranian and Arab Studies. Dr. Nourizadeh, good to have you back with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello to you.
So, Dr. Nourizadeh, really, we're hearing that the Iranian opposition is warning that Iran is linked to IS. This is not something new. It's not that we didn't know this before. It's not that it's, it's like coming and it's a new information. And more than that, do you really want to tell me that the United States is just sitting and saying, okay, yeah, now we can trust Iran completely and we are going to sign it? Because we know that Iran will keep its promise and will keep this agreement and won't go like neither to the left or neither to the right.
Well, I mean, we can look at this issue from 2 perspectives. Once we say, well, we don't trust Iranian regime. Nobody trusts Iranian regime. But on the other hand, the Americans are not naive enough to accept their promises. I'm sure they watch them carefully. Now they have tools and they have, other way of enforcing the deal upon the Iranian regime. They cannot do anything now. I tell you, I said it and I repeat it again and again. There is no alternative. Khamenei would not have accepted this deal if there was a way out. Khamenei wants the bomb. We have no doubt. He wants the bomb. Once he said to some Iranian scientists, and one of them unfortunately was killed by the regime, Mr. Hossein-Pour Ardashir, because he leaked that information to us. He said to them, look at North Korea, a country, a wicked regime, poor country, hungry people. They have bombs and the American could do nothing to them. If we have a bomb, with our resources, with 75 million Iranian, then we would be the greatest force in the area, and we can do whatever we want. That's his wishes, his dream. But that dream would not come true. The American, the Israeli, the international community, they would not allow such a crazy regime to have their hand on atomic bomb. And therefore, this deal would tie their hands, and they cannot move any further. They cannot do anything because if they just cross the red line, one step, 1 inches, then the consequences would be so disastrous that they cannot sustain. They cannot, they cannot survive. I'm telling you that.
Yes, Dr. Nourizadeh, I want to join you with the prayer to hope that the American regime is not that naive. Dr. Nourizadeh, always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much,
Indeed.
Indy.
Thank you very much. Staying with, we are now going to, in one way or another, to economy and tech, but in Milan, Expo Milan 2015 will open its doors tomorrow, the first world fair since Shanghai 5 years ago. But the project has been marred by corruption scandals and protest. Our correspondent Ayman Siksik is there. Ayman, buonasera.
Buonasera, Lucy. Well, many Italians here tonight wish they could say buonasera, but the Expo 2015, as you said, has been marked by a little bit of controversy. Let's go back a little bit and share why this happened. The Expo 2015, this massive technology exhibition, the preparations of which you can probably see here behind me, is being held and attended now by 120 countries from all over the world. These first respondents, these first entrepreneurs from all over the world started to pour in today, just a few hours before the official launch of the Expo tomorrow. And the focus this year for the Expo is feeding the planet. So really the goal is trying to find a technological solution, an innovative technological solution to end world famine, as opposed to making donations which for many years have not seemed to work that well. Now, you might say, so far so good, so why is anyone protesting? But the Italians have been unhappy. There was a lot of dismay with the Expo for some months now. And today, one day before the Expo's official launch, there have been protests across Milan with people saying these massive funds that Italy has funneled to the Expo, a massive exhibition, could be used elsewhere. And Lucy, I don't have to tell you that the Italian government is no stranger to controversy. However, it seems that as of now, the Expo 2015, despite the public uproar, will continue.
Well, Ayman, it definitely will continue, and Milan suits you. Thank you very much for this. And now to economy. And with me right now is economy reporter for the Jerusalem Post, Neve Ellis. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy. How are you?
Very good. We're here in the Jaffa Port, which is not that bad. Not like Milan, but it's not that bad. It's very beautiful.
Not so bad.
Not
Maybe
so
not
bad.
as fashionable, but still quite nice.
Not that fashionable. But let's talk about Windows, and let's talk about Microsoft.
Yeah, Microsoft, the epitome of uncool in tech, is making a comeback, or so it seems. Basically, they're having their big developers conference over these days right now in San Francisco. It's called Build. And they're announcing like a really aggressive strategy, which shows that they're doing a lot to try to come back and not just
Be fashionable.
Not exactly, just like in Milan, not just be, the Windows machine that's running on your computer, but actually even be cool. So Satya Nadella, their CEO for a little over a year now, came out and said that he predicts that Windows 10, their upcoming system, which is expected to come out this summer, is going to be on 1 billion devices in 3 years.
Wow.
Now, why is this interesting? Windows runs on over 90% of computers worldwide, but it runs on about 2.5% of mobile devices, right? Everyone knows that they have their Android, they have their Apple. Who uses a Windows phone? So one of the things that they're doing is saying, okay, we admit that we are not going to be able to compete. They have their own ecosystems. There's Apple that has their devices. There's Android that has their devices and their apps. Windows is saying, we're going to make it very easy for people to transfer their programs from Windows and Android.
You know what I'm interested in how come they woke up only now?
I think it's a very big process, right? First of all, they have new leadership, and this is the kind of thing that takes a lot of time. So a lot of this has been in the works for a while, and they have to prepare the technology. But now, especially in this developers conference, you're getting a peek into what it is that they're trying to do. And they have some really cool strategies for doing that. So for example, Windows 10 now is going to run on all the devices, and they're telling programmers, you just need to program one program, and we'll figure out how to make it work on your computer, on your tablet, on your phone, on your Xbox, and it'll automatically figure out. And And if you're a if you're an Apple programmer, an Android programmer, no problem. We'll make it really easy for you because they need that app store environment.
How they're going to, I believe that this is not the question to ask you, but how they are going to solve this, them being so slow, just right.
Yeah.
If we're comparing it to Apple and Android.
So that's the thing, is that now for the first time in a long time, Microsoft is saying things and people are going, oh, that's pretty cool. So one of the things that they announced, for example, is that, okay, if you have Windows that can run on all your devices and figure it out all at the same time, they're saying in the future you're not going to need a computer. Have a Windows phone in your pocket and it'll pop up on your screen and it'll pop up on your TV, it'll pop up wherever you need, and it'll be running Windows already. And that's a good reason to maybe have a Windows phone. Another thing that they have, which is super cool.
It's already happening in Apple.
It is, but they're really showing like a unified vision for the future. Another thing that they have, which is super cool, is the HoloLens. If you haven't seen this, Google it.
Yes.
It makes Google Glass, which failed tremendously, look really lame. It's like a virtual reality headset that puts the entire computer screen on in front of what you're doing. It'll build it on your desk, on your walls. It's the kind of thing that for the first time is making people go, Microsoft, well, that's kind of cool.
I'm talking already too much with my hands. I don't want to know if I will have such a device at home. It will take me out of control.
But wouldn't it be great to not have your screens anymore? Everything just all on the HoloLens,
nice
wherever you
touching.
want it.
Yeah, this.
We'll see if it
Alice,
works.
thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. And we're going from one funny thing to something completely not funny. Lately in Israel, more and more women who have suffered sexual abuse are finding the courage to reveal their identities and speak openly about their horrific experience. Shahal Peled has more on the phenomena, sparking a big debate in the country.
The headlines in Israel this week were full of the courage of one young woman, May Fatal. The 19-year-old soldier in the Israeli military generated a heated debate when she took to Facebook to reveal her identity as a woman sexually abused by an army officer.
There's a cultural change in what Mai did by transferring the shame from the abused to the abuser. We're used to a hidden victim, anonymous with a robotic voice. She's usually concealed and almost always inhumane. It's very difficult to relate to someone you can't see or hear.
The number of reported incidents of sexual abuse in the Israeli military has risen substantially over the past 3 years, to an average of almost 3 complaints a day. Fatal is just one of an increasing number of women who chose not to only expose their trauma, but face it openly, even at the price of public slander.
We haven't advanced. There's a lot of awareness in the public. But if you look, even this beautiful soldier that revealed herself now, everyone was talking, she's provocative, she's in a swimsuit, and so on. My God, she's 19. This is how she's supposed to live in life.
Political and media advisor Odelia Carmon was one of the first women to step up against the ongoing discrediting of abused women. She was brought back to the days she was harassed by Moshe Katsav, Israel's 8th president and then Minister of Transportation, when the reputation of one of the plaintiffs in the case was smeared by the defense.
At that time, I decided to expose myself, still with only the initials of my name. And I confessed that he sexually harassed me also.
The judicial system in Israel is also built to prevent these women from revealing their identities.
They think they protect her, but actually they overprotect her. And let her speak for herself. Let her take the opportunity to say what she feels and what she wants and freely and out, open in the air.
Senior journalist Yael Dan has been on a 15-year crusade to shed light on these horrific stories.
What is happening now with Facebook and the net is that women really find a way to speak.
If Mai's parents and I would have known she would publish her story, I think we would have tried to stop her. Because we're from a different generation, scared our reputation will suffer. I'm so proud of her she did it, because I wouldn't have dared.
Powerful men who abuse that power to sexually harass have been part of society for centuries. Today, with the right support, women are finding more platforms to voice their side of the story and bravely face the consequences.
It's good that they're speaking out. A new scandal involving Germany. The Süddeutsche Zeitung daily reported today that Germany spied on France in cooperation with the United States. The country's intelligence service, the BND, eavesdropped on officials from French presidency and Foreign Affairs Ministry, as well as the EU Commission. The information gleaned was given to the United National Security Agency. The German newspaper did not say when and for how long the spying occurred. Yes, and now to sports. And with me right now is Merav Savir. Good evening.
Good evening.
So we don't have a lot of time today, but let's talk about Pacquiao versus Mayweather.
Biggest fight they're calling it the biggest fight of the century. It is definitely the richest fight in history of boxing.
If I heard about it, I think it is big.
It's huge. And now, obviously, Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Money Mayweather, that puts that first money in there. They only sold about 500 to 1,000 tickets for fans. The rest of it is going to promoters, everything around. But those tickets that they sold for thousands of dollars. They sold within seconds, and within minutes they were on StubHub for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because that's how excited people are for this. This is such a big deal because they've been talking about it for years. Pacquiao has wanted to have this fight for ages, and Floyd Mayweather has been passing it off and passing it off. So when he finally said, okay, it was so exciting for fans, not only in the boxing world, but all over the world are waiting for this. Manny Pacquiao is huge in the Philippines. He's seen as a role model.
It's like Jackie Chan?
Sort of, but a real life one that is in politics also. So, yeah. So they're waiting for this, and this can really, if you ask Floyd Mayweather, he says, it doesn't matter, I'm 47-0, that's my legacy.
Yeah,
but there are those out there who are saying this will define his legacy. If he loses this fight, which a lot of people think he will, that's what people are going to remember at the end of the day.
This is how it's like even Jackie Chan is a movie star, but I know it's like, this is how my boxing word relates to.
I think one of them is martial arts, one of them is boxing. Slightly different, same world.
Don't ask Merav Savir, don't ask. Brazil, let's talk to Brazil.
Less than 500 days away from the Summer Olympics in Rio, if you can even wrap your head around that. It seems like just a couple of days ago we were in the last Summer Olympics in London. But Brazil still having issues. We talked about them so much before the World Cup, already talked about them before these. And now Brazil's Ministry of Labor yesterday announced that it's stopping construction at 2 venues. One of them at a tennis site and another one at the velodrome. And the ministry said, and I'm quoting, it's because of a grave and imminent danger to the physical safety of workers. And we've seen so many problems with workers around the world, Qatar also for 2022. Now they're saying that this isn't going to last long. It's very minor things. In the velodrome, it's because they have a ramp that's too steep, so they're afraid people are going to fall down it. And the tennis arena is due to missing guardrails. So they're at least showing that they're trying to make an effort here to make it the safest as possible, not to have any accidents. And there's so much heat on them ahead of especially for contamination in the waters where there's supposed to be sailing events.
It's like if you cannot do it actually while you...
And they showed us in for the World Cup that they may not be able to do it, but they did it.
Yeah. So, Merav Savir, thank you very much. Not Jackie Chan, right?
No, that's not me.
It's not me. Merav Savir, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Today, Vietnam and the United States mark 40 years since the end of the Vietnam War. This morning, a military parade was staged throughout the streets of Ho Chi Minh City. The war ended in 1975 when North Vietnam captured South Vietnam's capital, Saigon, and claimed victory. In total, at least 3 million Vietnamese and 58,000 U.S. soldiers were killed. And continuing a look back in history really related to what is happening today, with me right now is Danny Swabel. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to have you here. Always, you're bringing us examples that history repeats itself.
It is insane that almost to the day, April 29th, 1992, the LA riots. And I don't know if you grew up with some of these images. I think they made it worldwide, but the looting, the violence perpetrated against Rodney King. Well, this is what started it all. And the cops, the LA cops, were acquitted for this brutal beating. And it set off the community. And it was disgusting. So first, we obviously have to say these acts aren't helpful. They're terrible. They're deplorable. But the thing is, there is a quote that was from Martin Luther King in the 60s where he says, "A riot is the language of the unheard." And as we see in this situation, I feel in Baltimore, it's so true. there's something beyond maybe the cops level of racism, them doing what they did to some of the black people as of this summer. Maybe it's even institutional. Maybe it starts with the people being born into abject poverty, lack of education. In some neighborhoods, even where I grew up in Chicago, you have certain neighborhoods, let's say more of the white, developed neighborhoods, where maybe perhaps you have 10 kids for every one teacher in a classroom.
I want to ask you about your experience, because you're coming from Chicago, right?
Yes.
And growing up, you saw this?
The thing is, in my neighborhood where I grew up, you would see that, we had, the streets were being cleaned, and if there was something got broken into, the city would make sure to sweep up the glass. But then you go on the south side of Chicago, there's garbage in the street, it smells, the classrooms, as I was saying, there's maybe 10 kids to a classroom where I maybe grew up, but on the south side of Chicago, maybe 20, 30 kids to a classroom for every one teacher. So that's not an environment to learn. So when you see by the very base level of maybe what some would call as racism, it's not a fair system for everybody. So when people are living in abject poverty, not that it's an excuse to riot and loot and do the terrible things that are being done sometimes in Baltimore, but you could understand that people are going to be set and they're going to rebel against the system, and we see it today.
Do you think we started talking about, is it integrating, the lack of integration between black and white people in the United States, or is it education, is it culture, or is it all together?
I think it's all together, but I think first if you start with education and just, obviously if you get kids when they're young and yet you work the communities together and they're both given the equal opportunities, because sometimes looking back at my childhood, though it wasn't easy, I do look at it like I was maybe born with a silver spoon or a golden spoon in my mouth compared to what I see just from people just right across the tracks, maybe on the other part of town. So maybe if you start with this, then people could obviously be able to walk to each other and understand each other. A white cop could look at a black kid and they wouldn't be so fearful of each other as the other.
I want to show you something just happening just right now in Jerusalem. We just showed you some pictures. We're showing you some pictures from last few hours today. Clashes in Jerusalem as Ethiopian Jews protest alleged police brutality. We're, of course, from Jerusalem here, black and white, also in Israel. Unbelievable. Danny Swabel, thank you very much. It's all the same all around the world. Unbelievable. 2 minutes and I'll be back.